If you thought a Rolls Royce Corniche was a convertible car from the 80s, well, you'd be right, of course, but you'd also be slightly wrong because there was a Corniche long before that. The name first appeared in 1971, and prior to 1981, you could in fact get a hardtop and a convertible Corniche. It's essentially a two-door version of the Silver Shadow, but in reality it's actually a lot more than that. So it's a coach-built car really, and it's got a little bit more power and it's just generally a little bit more special. And it was also very expensive. We've got a really pretty rare example here, courtesy of owner Keith Davies. We're going to take it out, see what it's like. There is something really special about this car. I had a Turbo R myself. So I'm used to the traditional Rolls and Bentley cars, but this really does have a sense of occasion. Really all it is a two-door version of the Shadow, but actually it's a lot more than that. You know, it's a coach-built car for a start. I mean, this one's been lovingly restored, I have to say. It's been done absolutely beautifully. I mean, this is like going back in time to the 70s and driving a brand new off the production line car, I think. It's a fascinating story, the two-door Silver Shadow, really. Of course, Rolls-Royce moving over to monocoque construction for the Silver Shadow have made it that much harder for the coach building industry to create special bodywork. I mean, by the time the car launched, there weren't very many of them left anyway, but there were two. There was James Young and there was Mulliner Park Ward, which was Rolls-Royce's in-house division. It was James Young who actually got there first. They managed to work up a two-door Shadow within a year of the car's launch. It wasn't terribly adventurous by the standards of older coach-built Rolls-Royces, but it was a good effort. Essentially a Shadow without back doors, of course. Rolls-Royce themselves took a little bit longer to come up with a two-door Shadow, but they did a much more involved job. And of course, Mulliner Park Ward, being part of Rolls-Royce, had a bit of an advantage in that they didn't have to start with a complete car and convert it. They were able to start with a part-finished body shell and then create a two-door body on the top of it, which was why the factory-built cars were that little bit more stylish. And of course, they were a better value proposition than the James Young car, and James Young did go out of business a little while later. It wasn't all rosy for the Rolls-Royce built cars though, because as soon as the two-door Shadow was launched, the parent company Rolls-Royce actually ended up facing bankruptcy because of the aero engines problems. The factory-built cars, they also came with a few extra refinements, notably an extra 10% horsepower. That was the era when they described the power output as adequate. They famously didn't quote any specific horsepower, but it's generally reckoned that a car like this would be about 220 horsepower. So, you know, it's enough. And again, it's not the sort of car, as usual with these classic Rolls-Royces, it's not the sort of car that you bury the throttle in. It really isn't. I mean, with this car, I'm just driving it with fingertips on the steering wheel. Typical thin-rimmed Rolls-Royce steering wheel of the classic cars, and it's just nice to just waft along, and you know you've got ample power in reserve. You don't really look down at the speedometer. You just you look at the countryside rolling by, and you just keep up with the traffic, and you don't need to race anybody. You know you could if you want to, but that's not what cars like this are about. They're about style and cruising and refinement, and this is so refined. I mean, this is a 71 car we've got here. It's actually a Bentley. Some people might have noticed that, which makes it exceptionally rare. The Corniche was sold as both a Bentley and a Rolls Royce, and being a Bentley, this one is one of, I think, 63 cars, the owners just told me. It's so refined, even by the standards of modern cars. You can hear the V8 just enough to let you know it's there, sort of muscular V8 thrum there. But the ride is immense. I mean, this is just brilliant. I've had a Turbo R myself, and it didn't have a ride anything like as composed as this. We're going over all sorts of newly built roads and potholes and speed bumps and barely noticing anything. And that's what these cars were all about, serene progress with an added dose of style, and they really did get it spot on. I particularly like the fact that this is the hardtop, because the convertible Corniche, it does have an image of sort of film stars in the south of France and everything, and this one really flies under the radar. And if someone does a double take, they know their old cars, and they've spotted that this is a Bentley two-door Corniche. You'd normally expect a load of wind noise in a car like this, and it's not bad. You can hear a little bit of a rustle, but you can just imagine yourself sitting at triple-digit speeds and just sort of one finger on the wheel, cruising all the way across Europe to your destination in the south of France, in the early 70s. Of course, it rides like a big Citroen, and that's no surprise, because Shadows of this age did use the hydraulic suspension, which is very, very similar to the Citroen system. I mean, parts of the system were actually licensed from Citroen. It's got such a serene ride. It's a little bit easier to live with, though, than something like a DS. You don't have the sharp brakes and things like that. It just just feels a bit more familiar. Of course, all Rolls Royces of this era were, well, pretty much hand-built cars, but this is more hand-built than most. Being a Mulliner Park Ward car, it was actually constructed off the main Crewe production line at Mulliner Park Ward's premises, and they would carry on doing it that way until I think '94 when it was amalgamated with the Crewe works. The Corniche itself would carry on until '95. It was that popular. Other Rolls Royces had come and gone, but the Corniche carried on. It received turbocharged engines and all the other refinements that came with the later cars, but the Corniche was essentially produced from '71 right until '95. In the early days, you could get both hardtop and convertible Corniches, but in '81 the hardtop cars were discontinued, which means they are the rarer of the two. And ask most people to picture a Corniche, and they will picture the convertible. You think of Corniche as being very much a Rolls Royce name, really, although obviously this is a Bentley. Ironically, though, the Corniche is actually a Bentley name. It's something that Rolls Royce pinched from Bentley's back catalogue. It was first used for a streamlined concept car back in 1939. So, ironic, really. This particular car's had a lot of work done to it over the years, but like I say, it feels like a factory fresh example. It's absolutely lovely. It was done by Nigel Sandell, I think, who we know very well. He's done some magic here. It does drive beautifully. The first time I drove one of these, a Rolls Royce of this era, I was a little bit intimidated by it. I was a lot younger then, maybe, but it's not so much familiarity breeding contempt, but it's just that once you drive a few miles in these cars, you realise just how easy they are to drive, and they're so easy to place on the road. Just unlike a modern car, you can see the wing corners and you can see the bonnet emblem, whether it's the Wing B or the Spirit of Ecstasy. And actually, they're not as big as you think. Certainly, when they came to do the Spirit, they realised that it was actually, by American standards, not a terribly large car, and that they had to really go to town with some styling touches to make it seem bigger than it really was. So the Shadow, by modern standards, I think it's got the footprint of a transit van. So it's actually quite easy to drive as an everyday car. You maybe wouldn't want to for fear of damaging it, but actually it fits into your life quite well. So a lot more handy than a lot of these massive SUVs. Lack of road noise as well on these older Rolls Royces. They've got a high profile of tyre, haven't they, by modern standards? And our terrible roads, it's managing them, sort of gliding over them serenely, and there's no tyre roar, there's no thumping. Of course, it's not a car you want to throw into the bends. They do roll a little bit, and you start to feel the weight of the Shadow when you start to push it around a little bit. But like I've said a few times, it's not how you drive these cars. It feels like you're doing the wrong thing if you try and hurry a Shadow. Turbo R, maybe, even they can get a little bit unruly when you push them, but this car, it just feels like totally the wrong thing to do. This is all about civilised cruising. I think that word sums it up, civilised. This is like the most civilised car I've driven all year. I could just cruise along in this all day. It's more relaxing than my living room, I think. It smells nicer.
It's a 1971 Bentley Corniche. I saw it advertised about 6 or 7 years ago. You're probably aware Bentley Corniches are pretty rare. There's only 63 of these made, with a fixed head roof, certainly. So I snapped at the chance to go and have a look at it, and there was a little bit of work needed doing, but not too much. So I'm the sort of person who spends their time really wanting to fiddle with cars. I enjoy the challenge of putting things to a better state than it was when I bought it. So I've spent a lot of time refurbing the interior, doing all sorts of odds and sods inside. The bodywork is pretty good. It's all been restored before I bought it. The engine is immaculate. Most of the running gear is pretty sorted. So it was just a question really of doing minor little bits and pieces and making it work.
Yeah, all credit to the owner of this and the people who restored it for him. It really is lovely. I've always wanted to try one of these early Corniches. Wondered what they were all about, and now I know exactly what they're all about. They are about civilised and very stylish travel. Be a shame to park it up and get out, I think.